In my career as an English language teacher, I've had the pleasure of basically traveling all over the world, many countries in Europe, Africa, North America, and South America. And if you're certified as an English teacher or thinking about getting certified as an English teacher, the world is open to you too. In this video, I'm going to talk to you about the steps that you should consider taking if this is a lifestyle that appeals to you. I'll base this on my own story and my own experience and expertise in the matter. So let's jump into it. I'm going to start off by telling you my own personal story, things you should think about when getting started, different teaching roles, what to consider when living and working in some countries around the world, and how you can achieve that sustainable life as a digital nomad. So getting started, my own story started back in Ireland. Years ago in the early 2000s in Dublin, I was finishing college. And at that time, I had a lot of friends who were from France and Spain and Italy, in particular, those three countries. Of course, I met people from other places around the world as well. And I found myself really intrigued by language, by the questions that they would ask me, and the realization that the way that I said things might be a little funny or a little bit peculiar. For example, in Ireland, one way to say, "How are you?" is, "How's she cutting?" And that's, maybe a little bit of a countryside way of saying that expression in Ireland. And I realized my friends thought that this was really funny. And to me, it was just perfectly natural. So that got me wondering, is there something like that in Spanish, or is there something like that in French? And I remember in French, I learned this expression, "C'est de la bombe du bal du boulet." And that directly translates as it's the bomb of the ball of the bullet, but it just really actually means, oh, that's great, that's fantastic. But it was this really interesting way to say that. And I realized that when I said that to my French friends, they thought it was funny, this Irish guy saying this kind of niche phrase to them. And this got me yet more and more intrigued in language. So after finishing college, I had this opportunity to go and live in France. And I found work in a lycée, which is a French high school. And I started working there as an assistant d'anglais, which means a English assistant. If you watch this channel, you've probably heard me talking about this story once or twice before, because it was a really formative moment for me, not just as a teacher, but even as a person. I found that I loved the classroom environment. I loved working with students. I loved trying to help people work through things and I guess grow and learn. Now, at that time, I had no training whatsoever as a teacher. Basically, my only qualifications were that I spoke English and that I had a degree, and I guess that I had a willingness to take this job on. So I guess, the lesson for me here, based on my own story, is I realized that I had a passion for this, that I had an interest. And, if I could impart that to you, ask yourself, is this something that appeals to you? Do you like the idea of learning other languages? Now, learning another language is not a prerequisite to becoming an English language teacher. You don't need to speak every language in the world to teach English. That's one of the very cool things about teaching English as a foreign language. You do it entirely through English. So, don't worry about having to learn French or Spanish or Portuguese. It's not required at all. However, if you are interested in that, I think it's a big advantage because it allows you to put yourself in the shoes of the student. And if you can put yourself in the shoes of the student, you can realize what are the difficulties that they're facing. And if you can realize what are the difficulties that they're facing, then you can come up with a strategy, something to teach them, to help them get around that. And that's going to make your teaching much more empathetic. You're going to get your students on board, and you're going to be much more targeted on what the students' needs are. And that's really what it's about at the end of the day. If you can identify what the student requires you to help them with, then you're going to be much more effective in your teaching. So, after I finished my time in France, I came back to Ireland, worked in a non-teaching job. I had this in my mind that I had such a great experience teaching. So when the opportunity came up this time to move to Spain, I jumped at the opportunity and I started looking for language teaching jobs in Madrid. Now, I still wasn't qualified. I just had experience now. So I had one more item, I guess, in my CV. I could say, okay, well, I have worked as an English language teacher. And at that time, back in the early 2000s, that was enough to get me in the door. I got an interview, and I just brought my passion. I brought my willingness to learn and do the job to that interview, and I was able to point to this experience that I had and the fact that, I had enough of a level of English to be effective in an English language teaching scenario, and I landed a job as an English language teacher in Madrid. So a big part of the work there in Madrid at the time was working in company, as it's called. So I was working in banks, in businesses, in law firms, that kind of thing, and a lot of one-to-one tuition. This was a super learning experience for me because it really helped me with monitoring students. Sometimes when you're in a group situation, it's hard to know which student should I be monitoring, where should I take notes. But if you're doing a one-to-one lesson, well, you only have to monitor that one student and just keep your notebook with you, and you just take some notes as the student is talking or doing an exercise, and then you can use that for what's called delayed error correction. And this is one of the most, effective things that you can do in a one-to-one lesson, but not only a one-to-one lesson, group lessons as well. Delayed error correction has a huge impact. So now I had yet another experience. I had two experiences under my belt, teaching in France and teaching in Spain. When my time in Spain came to an end after about a year and a half, almost 2 years, I came back to Ireland and I decided, okay, it's time to get a qualification. For a couple of reasons. First of all, I felt that I needed to up my game a little bit because there were a few times in my French and Spanish experiences where I felt a little bit caught out. I felt lacking in knowledge. I felt that students came at me with questions that I just wasn't equipped to answer. So I felt somewhat feeble as a teacher. So I wanted to be able to go into my lessons with a bit more confidence and really to be able to deliver higher standards of lessons for those learners. The other reason why I decided to get a qualification was that in Ireland at the time, and continues to be the way, the industry of teaching English as a foreign language was regulated. So I couldn't just go to a school and say, hey, I've got some experience, can I have a job? They would say, okay, we like your experience, but we need you to be certified. So this is one other big piece of advice I would like to impart to you. Check if the country where you are currently teaching or want to go and teach requires certification. This could be one big factor in helping you decide whether you should take a TEFL certificate. For example, like the International TEFL Academy's TEFL certificate. I highly recommend that one, by the way. You can find a link to it in the description below. Or you might want to take a CELTA certificate. I talk a lot about CELTA on this channel. CELTA, like the International TEFL Academy's certificate, it is internationally recognized, but it does have a little bit more name recognition. So you might want to think about what's the right certificate for you to go ahead and take there. So once I was certified as an English language teacher, I got to teaching in Dublin, and I had such a wonderful experience there. All of my colleagues were great people. Academically, I learned a lot from them. I had one or two colleagues there who basically taught me how to teach pronunciation. I had even gotten through my teacher training certificate and still been kind of shaky with pronunciation. Lots of aspects of grammar were still not very clear to me. So working in this school where we had a teacher's room where everybody would have lunch together and we would talk, about life, but also about teaching our students, our classes, etc. I learned so much. So I'm going to say that to you. This is the next big piece of, professional development advice I would offer you, is to try to get into a school where there is a teacher's room, where there's an environment of professional development. Maybe you could ask that in your interview. Often in interviews, the employer will ask you, do you have any questions for me? So you might ask, what's your approach to professional development? Do you have a teacher's room? Do teachers get together? Do teachers share ideas? Honestly, for me, this was huge in my development as a teacher. After a few years living, working, teaching in Dublin, loving life, I decided, okay, I want to keep going here. I want to keep progressing. And the next logical step for me at the time was to take the Cambridge ESOL Delta. This is a diploma level certificate, kind of on the same level as a master's, However, it has more of a practical focus than a master's. That's often one of the big differences that people point to when they're thinking about a master's in English language teaching or applied linguistics or a diploma like the Delta course. The Delta is a bit more practical. So it has more application to actually being in the classroom. And for me, what it really did for me was it opened the door to teacher training. Soon after taking the Delta, I had yet another wonderful opportunity in life to move to South America. This time it was Brazil, and in particular, Sao Paulo. Very quickly, I found a school that was looking to train somebody as a CELTA teacher trainer. I thought my prayers had been answered. It was exactly what I was looking for. I had the experience, I had the qualifications, and they had the job offer that was exactly what I was looking for. And boy, oh boy, did I ever fall in love with this next stage in my career. Teacher training was such a wonderful new experience for me. It helped put lots of things into perspective about my own teaching, made me question aspects of why I do what I do and why this or that is effective. And I got so many great opportunities out of being a CELTA trainer. Very quickly, I had the opportunity to train to be a Trinity Cert TEFL teacher trainer. I did a lot of bespoke or one-off teacher training courses with the British Council around the world. I started offering my own coaching service online, which you can avail of by clicking the link in the description below, but more on that in just a moment. So the world of teaching and teacher training really opened up for me, and I began to realize there's more and more and more ways that you can be a teacher. These 4 years in Brazil led to yet more opportunities for me. I began to get into freelance CELTA teacher training, so I did CELTAs in San Diego in the United States, in Durban in South Africa, back in my home country of Ireland, Canada, and a few other countries around the world. It was really a wonderful experience for me to get to bring my teacher training on the road, as it were. I got to see amazing places while working and living in these fantastic places as well. And then after that, yet more opportunities. I wound up here in the east coast of Canada, in Nova Scotia, as a general manager, director of studies, director of teacher training, head of curriculum development. I wore many hats in my early days here in Canada. And then from there, my career blossomed yet again into instructional design and online coaching, which, it really made such a huge impact for me for making my teaching career yet more sustainable. Okay, so let's talk about getting started from your point of view. So, in my own case, I started off just by going to parties with friends who are from other countries and just finding out, oh, it's so interesting to learn how to say this or that in another language. Now, if that's an opportunity for you, if you know people from other countries, hang out with them, ask them, how would you say this or how would you say that? Try to learn just a few phrases of their language. See if it's something that you find interesting or not. If you don't have people in your circle of friends who are from abroad, well, you can check out, are there any volunteer opportunities where you can teach somebody or get into a conversation club for learning English. This could be a great opportunity for you to have exposure to people who speak another language. I really think this is a great very first step. If you don't have it in your locality, then maybe check out some online forums or groups or clubs for learning English. There's many, many opportunities out there. Just try and get some exposure to people who speak another language and see what it's like for you to learn just a few words. Is it something that you find interesting? Is it something that you find appealing? If so, then I would then consider taking the next step, which would be thinking about getting the right qualification for you. Getting a qualification helps to formalize and put all of your ideas around teaching into a framework that you can apply and have more and more effective lessons, whether they be face-to-face, one-on-one, in groups, online, whatever format it is. If you're coming to those teaching situations with training, with a plan, with a framework, it's going to make such a difference to not just your experience, which is huge, but also your students' experience. If your students feel like they're learning from you, if they feel like, yes, this is a good use of my time, that's going to create this feedback loop that's Good for you, good for them, good for you, good for them, and it's going to be a wonderful experience. So once you've tried out with people who speak another language, once you get qualified, then you want to start looking around what's the right country for you. Maybe you live in a country where English is spoken as the native language. I currently live in Canada. I grew up in Ireland, both native speaking countries, and they have very unique opportunities when it comes to teaching English. Often what you're going to find in native speaking countries are mixed language group classes, which is wonderful. I really love that in Ireland and here in Canada. You would have people from Saudi Arabia, people from Japan, people from Spain, people from Italy, people from Brazil, all over the world. And these multilingual classes created such fruitful, engaging experiences for, again, both teacher and student. I absolutely loved it. Now, on the other hand, if you're living or considering working in a non-native speaking country, so that's a country where English is not the predominant language or the official language, then you're probably going to have what are called monolingual groups. So when I was teaching in Spain, 99% of my students were Spanish or Spanish speakers. And again, this created a different, not better, not worse, but just different set of opportunities and challenges. First of all, opportunities. Because they were all monolingual, now I could begin to use translation as a tool or a technique in the class, whereas you can't really use translation in a multilingual group. Like maybe you know a little Spanish, but what if you don't know Portuguese, or you don't know Arabic, or you don't know Japanese, and you have those students? Well, using your Spanish with that one Spanish student could make the other students kind of feel left out. So translation is not really an option in the multilingual group, but in the monolingual group, it becomes an option. Again, for you as a person living in that country, there's big opportunities when it comes to integrating into that country or culture, because all of your students, for example, are, let's say, if I think about my experience living and working in Madrid, all my students were not only Spanish, but 99% of them were Madrileñan. They were from Madrid. So sometimes in our lessons, in our warmers, when we were just talking about how life was, they would always have recommendations. You should go here to eat. You should go there to experience this music or that kind of cultural event or whatever it was. So, I had these wonderful tourist guides all the time who were my students. So it's, comes with a lot of great opportunities there in both scenarios, the native speaking country environment and the non-native speaking country environment, if I can use those terms. The next thing I want to talk to you about are the different teaching roles. So as I mentioned, I had a whole bunch of teaching roles. I started off as this English assistant in a high school, and then I went on to one-on-one lessons and then these multilingual groups. And from there, I started getting into the niche areas of what's sometimes called ESP. That's English for specific purposes. So you can get into teaching business English. You can get into teaching legal English. I recently came across somebody online who is teaching English for the fashion industry. She was able to use her experience working in the fashion industry to offer lessons to people who work in that industry, and she's actually made a big success for business. You can also get into what are sometimes very lucrative areas of teaching exam classes. There are parts of the world, particularly countries like Saudi Arabia, where teaching an exam like IELTS is quite a money spinner. There's quite a lot of money to be made in that area. Then, looking at my own example, I've gone on and further diversified into teacher training. I've also got into instructional design and online coaching. This is a huge opportunity and something that I offer both group courses and one-to-one courses, how you can develop yourself as an online coach and develop that entrepreneurial business for yourself, which is going to be a huge boon for you when you're traveling the world and trying to live that digital nomad life. If you have your own coaching business that you can take on the road with you wherever you go, as long as you have internet access, computer, the camera, then you're good to go. So, reach out to me for a free 45-minute consultation if that's something that you find yourself drawn to or interested in. The next thing I want to drill down into is this aspect of living and working in a different country. So I've kind of touched on it a little bit already in this video, but if I think about the countries where I've spent a long time living, so obviously Ireland, born and raised, grew up there. I lived in France for about a year, Spain almost 2 years. I lived in Brazil for about 4 years, South Africa for about half a year, United States around the same amount of time, and here in Canada, oh my word, I've been here almost 10 years. Each country comes with its own challenges. Of course, every place you live comes with challenges, but it also comes with its own amazing opportunities and wonders that are on offer to you. For example, France, first of all, for me, oh my goodness, the food. Everybody thinks about the food in France. It's wonderful, but also the culture, the history. I lived in a region called Pays de Loire, which is in the northwest of France, and that part of France is marked by having so many castles. It's unbelievably beautiful. Also, the language appealed to me a lot as well. So these were big advantages when it came to living in France. Also, being from Ireland, to get back to Ireland from France wasn't a huge challenge. I just had to take about less than a 2-hour flight and I was home. So, these were big opportunities when it came to France. Then Spain, this time I lived in a big city in Madrid, the capital city of Spain. And what a culturally rich environment that was. Oh my goodness, there was everything, the food, the music, the dancing, the art. I used to live close to the Reina Sofia Museum or gallery, and I used to love to go and look at Picasso and Salvador Dali. Oh my goodness, it was amazing. Also, I'm a big sports fan, so you have Real Madrid, maybe the most famous football team in the world, Atletico Madrid. And in Spanish, learning the language, I remember there were sounds in Spanish that were completely new to me. I remember there was this the rolling R sound. It just didn't exist for me. And I remember standing in front of the mirror every day trying to make this. I couldn't do it. I was such a failure for such a long time, but eventually I got it. And then when you get this, it feels like, oh my goodness, I've learned a new skill and I can kind of sound a little bit more authentic when it comes to my Spanish. It's such a great feeling when you can start to communicate in a new language. I heard it said once, it's a lovely phrase, every language carries its own wisdom. And that's certainly, I found it to be true for sure. After Spain, I had the opportunity to go and live and work in Brazil. Now, Brazil has probably had the biggest impact on me out of all the countries I've lived in, aside from maybe Canada, because I've been here for the longest. I absolutely fell in love, but not right away. It was really, really challenging for me in the beginning. I remember, I moved to Sao Paulo, and that's huge city, I guess, depending what way you look at it. Some people say there's like 10, 12 million, but maybe if you look at the larger Sao Paulo, you can see it like it has maybe 30 million. I don't know how they measure these things. Some people say it's the biggest city in the world. Some people say that's Karachi. Some people say it's Tokyo. Some people say it's Mexico City. Anyway, it's one of the biggest cities in the world. And I remember looking around me in this direction, in that direction, in this direction, that direction, just high-rise buildings everywhere. It seemed like it made that phrase, the concrete jungle, seem like a literal truth to me. So I found it really hard. It was very noisy. It was moving. It was like so fast all the time. And it was just quite a shock to my system in the beginning. So you might think, okay, how did I get from these negative kind of feelings that I'm expressing now to saying that it's one of the places that had one of the biggest impacts on me of all the places that I've lived? Well, actually, there was a really big lesson here for me, in fact, that, whenever you move to another country or start living in a new place, there's always going to be an adjustment period. You might start feeling homesick or lonesome, or the cultural change might be just too big of an impact. It might just hit you too hard. You might miss your friends, your family, your food, whatever it may be. Any of these things can just seem like an insurmountable challenge, especially in those first few months when you're living and working in a new country. And I always tell people this, actually after about 5 or 6 months, I decided, you know what, it's not working for me. And I actually did go home to Ireland. But it was in my last couple of weeks in my first stint in Brazil that I began to think, I'm beginning to get some friends here and I can speak a little bit of Portuguese, but I was still feeling a little bit, it's not working. So I went home to Ireland. And when I was back, the flip started to happen to me. I started to think, things were just starting to get good in Brazil. And I started to miss Brazil. I realized that maybe I had made a mistake. And that's another piece of advice I'm going to give you. Like, I made many mistakes in my journey, many mistakes. And I don't think I would be here if I hadn't made some mistakes and I hadn't kind of said, you know what, Fergus, you got it wrong there. Maybe try something different, or maybe actually go back and give it another go. And that's exactly what I did with Brazil. I went back, and it's not like those challenges just evaporated. No, the traffic was still crazy in Sao Paulo. It was still a very noisy city. It was still so much hustle and bustle. But this time I came at it with, okay, I've got some friends. There's a few places I like to go. I've got a good job. I like the food here. I like the people here. There's enough positives here that maybe if I cultivate those positives, I can start to have a better life. And that's exactly what happened for me. So, the takeaway that I'd like to impart to you from this is, yes, it will be challenging in the beginning, but that will get better if you can find the reasons that make the place worthwhile for you. After Brazil, I had the opportunity to go and live and work in South Africa. Actually, I did 2 stints in South Africa for a total of about half a year or so. And oh my goodness, yet another life-changing experience. Living there right after living in Brazil actually was kind of the right moment for it, because I felt I had a little bit of my street smarts. I was a bit more wise to the world, and that kind of like helped me to fit into the city, Durban, where I was going to be living and working. I got really lucky to work in a wonderful school called the Durban Language Center. I highly recommend it. Shout out to Will and Carla, the owners of the Durban Language Center. It's a wonderful school, wonderful environment, wonderful place to learn English and to take your CELTA. I highly recommend it. And then the life around my work, I was able to go to these game reserves. Those are those national parks where you're going to see elephants and giraffes and wildebeest and wild dogs and lions and cheetahs and leopards. You see these animals out of the zoo in their natural environment. I can't compare. I don't even have the words to describe what that experience was like. Those memories that were given to me by my experience living and working in South Africa, they're priceless to me, and I would not give them up for the world. So thank you, South Africa. Thank you, life. Thank you, everything, for giving me that opportunity. After South Africa, then I had the opportunity to come and live here in Canada, the second largest country in the world. I am in the east coast of Canada. Such a beautiful, beautiful place. I live in this place called Nova Scotia, where there's less than 1 million people, but it's this huge tract of land. But in the context of Canada, it's pretty small. Again, the animals, the wilderness, the landscapes, it's breathtaking at times. To work here, obviously there's great social systems in place in Canada. It's a very secure country. The cost of living actually is quite high. There's high inflation here at the moment. However, the salaries are a bit better than other places in the world. Immigration was easier in the past. Actually, when I came to Canada, it was very, very challenging. It took me about 3 years to go through the whole Canadian immigration system. And it was only last year, my 9th year in Canada, that I actually became a Canadian citizen. So now all of that paperwork, that bureaucratic immigration stuff is behind me. However, as I was saying, it was easier in the past. It seems to be a little bit more curtailed now, a little bit more challenging to gain access into Canada. So if it's a country that you are interested in, and I live here, I love it, I highly recommend it, but check what is the work permit situation, what is the visa situation, what's the immigration situation for wherever you are thinking of coming from in the world. So the last thing I want to round off this video with is talking about how you can develop that sustainable life as a digital nomad while teaching English. For example, you could be teaching many things, but my expertise is primarily with teaching English, but also in the world of coaching. So the key word here, I would say, is diversify. Diversify what you can offer. So if it's primarily English language teaching that you do, well, teach general English. Teach English for specific purposes. Within that, start off by teaching business English for sure. There's a lot of work in there. But are there other opportunities like the one I referenced, teaching English for the fashion industry? Is there something that you have in your background that you can turn into a niche when it comes to teaching English? Is teacher training something that's interesting to you? Can you go after becoming a CELTA trainer, Trinity Cert, TEFL trainer? And then online coaching. This is really, becoming a big business. There are so many schools out there that are looking for online teachers. Check if that's going to be something that appeals to you. And coaching as your own business, becoming an entrepreneur. This is really the key to the sustainable life. This is something that I've done. This is something that I offer a coaching service on for you to develop your own business as an online coach and become yet more independent so that you can travel the world, so that you can make a difference in people's life, and then so that you can give back generously, so that you're not even wondering about, oh, do I have enough work? Can I pay my bills, etc. When you become your own business, when you become an entrepreneur, you start to really flourish and want to give back yet more and more. Okay, so this was the story of how I did it, how I turned teaching English as a kid just out of college into a career, into an entrepreneurial business, and I basically made a career of it. If this is something that appeals to you, taking a TEFL certificate or a CELTA certificate is one piece in the puzzle. But if you really want to make a plan for success, then why not reach out to me? You can use the link in the description below. Book a free consultation with me where we can talk about how we can make a plan of action for you to achieve those goals. So click that link in the description and book a free call right now. You've got nothing to lose and everything to gain. Okay, thank you so much for watching. If you found this video helpful and you think others might find it helpful, please do share it with any of those people or on your social media. It would really mean the world to me, and who knows, it could mean the world to somebody else who might not have otherwise come across it. Let me know in the comments down below what you're thinking about doing. Are you thinking about getting certified? Are you thinking about living in another country? Have you already done it? What has your experience been? Please do give that video a like, hit that bell notification, subscribe to the channel. I'd love to have you here as part of the integrated skills community and keep this conversation going about how we can all become these wonderful English language teachers and experience the freedom that comes with the digital nomad life. All that's left for me to say is bye for now, and I'll see you in the next one.